Like a child love would send to reveal and to mend, like a child and a friend, Jesus comes. Like a child.
Hello, everyone, and welcome. My name is Mike McMahon, and I'm the Executive Director of the Hymn Society in the United States and Canada. And I'm really excited today to have the opportunity to speak with Dan Damon and Eileen Johnson. They are both long-time and deeply involved members and leaders in the Hymn Society. Dan is an internationally published writer of hymn texts and tunes. His work appears in many current hymnals and supplements. He's Associate Editor of Hymnody for Hope Publishing Company, and he is a retired elder in the United Methodist Church. He's also a jazz pianist, and he often puts those skills together in his work. Eileen Johnson is a United Methodist deacon, and she is serving as Minister of Music and Worship at Sobrante United Methodist Church near Richmond, California. She formerly served on the executive committee of the Society and was on the editorial team for the hymnal supplement, Spirit Anew, Singing Prayer and Praise. Both Dan and Eileen have contributed to the hymn and also to the Canterbury Dictionary of Hymnology. And in 2016, Dan was named a fellow of the Hymn Society. So their story is intimately connected to this organization. And we'll talk about that a little bit. So anyway, welcome, Dan and Eileen. Good to be with you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Excuse me. It's lovely to see so many Hymn Society friends popping up in the chat.
Isn't it great? I mean, it's and by the way, it's thanks for mentioning that, Eileen. It's good to have all of you with us. If you would like to communicate at all, please do so through the chat, including any questions you might have. Normally we use the Q&A function, but to be honest with you, it would be easier for me to monitor just the chat. So if you have questions, please feel free to put them there in the chat and to make any comments you'd like to make as we go along through here. So normally when we start off, I like to ask people about their early life, and I will do that, but I'd like to start with Dan and Eileen to ask them about the Hymn Society and their life together. So how is the Hymn Society involved with your life?
You want to go first?
No, you.
So I think a lot of people, a lot of our Hymn Society friends know this story. We actually met at the Hymn Society. I was recruited to the Hymn Society by Nancy Faust and attended my first conference in 1990 in Charleston. I was a Lovelace Scholar, and Dan was one of the first people that I met. And we just hit it off in terms of a really nice professional collegial friendship.
And you asked me to introduce you to Austin
That's
Lovelace, and you were very impressed that I knew him already. Yeah, my first Hymn Society was Bryn Mawr a couple of years previous to that. And when I came to that conference, I was a young United Methodist pastor and not too savvy in the ways of travel. I got into the Philadelphia airport late at night without money for a cab and without a shuttle service. And so I spent the night on the floor of the airport. I couldn't afford a hotel room and took the train out in the morning. So unwashed, I'm walking up into the area where the conference was, and I was lucky to meet Brian Wren. He was the only person I knew at the time, and he invited me to come to breakfast. I sat down unwashed with George Shorney, Timothy Dudley Smith, and Brian Wren. Decided I was going to have a good time at the conference.
That's a great story. So when did you get married?
1999. Yeah, when we first met, we actually were married to two other people, and so we just had a very nice friendship. And then it turned out that both our marriages ended at approximately the same time. Mm-hmm. And so, we come to Hymn Society, have our yearly check-in. How's it going? How's it going with you? I'm getting a divorce. Oh, I'm getting a divorce too.
Wow.
Yeah, for those early years, we didn't talk about anything but church music. We would take walks in the evening, but I never asked her about her marriage or anything like that. I just assumed she was married to the luckiest guy in the world. I only found out later she was married to the stupidest guy in the world.
I think he's watching right now.
Yeah, let's hope not. But yeah, so we met in Charleston, and then at the Oberlin conference, I said, "Oh, I'm getting a divorce," and she said, "Oh, I am too." And so our relationship took a turn for the better about then.
But I really believe that it was the movement of the Spirit that brought us together, because there was a lot of woundedness for both of us from those previous relationships. And I think God just knew that we could bring healing and health and wholeness to each other. So I really view it as a gift, and will be eternally grateful to the Hymn Society for bringing me my husband.
We courted for, I don't know, 3 years or so, long distance on the phone. We were paying 10 cents a minute to Sprint at the time, and ended up getting married in Chicago right before the Vancouver conference. So we flew to Vancouver and had our honeymoon, stayed in a hotel that year, not in the dorms, and had a beautiful honeymoon there in Vancouver.
And in fact, Brian Wren was one of the officiants at our wedding, which was also a great gift.
That is so awesome. And, it could give other people an idea, to spend your honeymoon at the Hymn Society. Right?
Not the dorm.
Not in the dorm. I certainly agree with you there. That's great. Well, I do want to go back though now and ask you about your early life and how it, for each of you, what was it that drew you to church and music and ministry in your early life?
You go.
Me. All right. So neither of my parents are churchgoers. Well, my father's dead now, but he was raised actually in a very Christian home. His mother, my paternal grandmother, was a staunch member of the Church of the Nazarene until the day she died, but he did not continue in the life of the church. But I think because of my grandmother, we always had this kind of church connection. She lived in Michigan, we lived in New Jersey, but of course, every time she came to visit, we would be going to church. And I think she would try and make sure that I had some kind of Christian education, because I remember having, story Bibles and things like that growing up. And when we moved to Pennsylvania after my dad retired from the military, I got involved with a Mennonite congregation through camp ministry. And my Mennonite pastor, when I believe I was in maybe a junior in high school or a senior in high school, said to me, "Have you ever thought about music ministry?" Because I had been doing music in church, singing and stuff like that. And I hadn't. I was planning on being Jane Goodall and going off in the jungle and watching animals my whole life. So that was a pretty radical shift in terms of my thinking of what I wanted to do with my life. But after some time of reflection and talking to my voice teacher, I ended up going to Westminster Choir College, now part of Rider University. And I think within a month or a month and a half of being there, I just had that deep sense of knowing that I was where I was supposed to be. And that sense of call to being a pastoral musician has only deepened and continued as I moved through life. And I think the call to ordained ministry just is serving to provide new opportunities for me to connect music ministry with justice and peacemaking.
Wow, that's quite a story. Thank you. Dan, how about you?
Well, I was raised in the Evangelical Free Church in Rapid City, South Dakota. I tell people that's like Southern Baptist, only Swedish. And so we went to church 3 times a week. And I grew up singing the 3-chord hymns, the 19th century gospel songs. And I think the only hard song in our hymn book was "A Mighty Fortress Is Our God." And I don't know, I just always loved the church. Not really the sermons, I don't remember much of those at all, but the songs, even those three chords, that was all I needed to come into the presence of God. And I asked Jesus to come into my heart when I was 8 years old. And then when I was going through puberty, I figured Jesus probably wasn't in my heart after all. So I kept asking him to come in over and over. Eventually decided he must be there. So, I went to Greenville College, Free Methodist school, majored in music, and eventually ended up in seminary later on.
Wow.
Yeah, I guess I should have added that, excuse me. In my first marriage, I ended up living in Chicago and was actually part of the Bethany Theological Seminary, which is the seminary for the Church of the Brethren when it was still in Chicago, and ended up getting a master's in sacred music from Concordia River Forest, and had the privilege and opportunity to study under Carl Schock, which was really lovely.
Wow,
So-
that's awesome.
So, undergraduate degree and master's degree in sacred music, and then more seminary after that.
Right. Have both of you served Methodist churches during your whole career?
No.
Yeah, I did. 33 years or so of it.
In Michael Hahn's words, I was denominationally promiscuous.
I see. Okay.
Yeah, I've served UCC congregations, Church of the Brethren congregations, and Methodist congregations. And I think the Methodist church that I served in Chicago was really shaping me in terms of Wesleyan theology, even though I didn't know it, through the liturgy. And, when I finally, kind of at the end of things, had to take my Methodist polity and history class and started really formally studying Wesleyan theology, it's like, this is just giving me words for what I've felt for a long time. So
I'm hearing a lot of being in the right place in your story. Yeah, that's cool. And Dan, have you served as a pastor through your whole career, or have you ever served as a music minister?
I was, during the ordination process, they kept saying, wouldn't you really rather be a musician? We can tell, that's, and I learned in those interviews to say, no, I feel called to word, sacrament, and order. I never served as a music director in any church. I never wanted to. I felt called to be a pastor, and that's what I have been all these years.
Can you say a little bit about the way that music and singing has been part of your pastoral ministry?
I've always played the piano and preached, basically. I served little churches, and so they needed a piano player. They might have had a volunteer organist, who was okay. So we did Hammond B3 and piano, upright piano, in most of the churches that I served. I was associate pastor in Modesto for 3 years, and we had an AGO organist there, a pipe organ and a Yamaha Grand, and I very seldom played the piano for those 3 years, which I hated. And I was really happy to get back. I was associate there, and I was happy to get back to being pastor in charge. My last 25 years, I was at Richmond First United Methodist Church, and they had a little acrosonic piano there. When I got there, and during my first couple of months, I put my hand on the piano during church, and I said, do you think anyone would give this church a grand piano? Of course, no one thought anyone would. And so I repeated that question maybe 3 or 4 weeks, and then I bought the church a grand piano.
So apparently somebody did.
Yeah, it was $1,000 piano, it wasn't much, but it was a grand, and it was better than that darn spinet. And then in a couple of years, our piano tuner said, I found a great 1966 Baldwin 5/8 grand. It'd be perfect for your church, $6,000. And I told the board at the time, we can do a concert series if we get a good piano in here. And the concerts will pay for this piano. They believed me at the time, and so we bought it.
That's very cool. I mean, it's really interesting to hear about a style of ministry, though, that involves, leadership and music simultaneously.
Yeah, they always went together for me.
That's really cool. And Eileen, how about you in your career as a music minister? How have you? What have you come away with in terms of congregational life and the role of music and singing?
Well, it's really interesting. I feel like I've really been on a journey. At the time when I was going through Westminster, I'm assuming some of this is still very much there. It was, art and beauty, right? I have an Episcopalian friend who talks about worship the Lord in the holiness of beauty instead of the beauty of holiness.
I see.
So there was definitely an element of that, even though, the school was founded for the purpose of training church musicians. The bar was really high in terms of what you were expected to do. And so I brought that into my music ministry initially. And Nancy Faust, bless her, who really is a mentor to me, she said, you were really grim at the beginning because I was so, no mistakes allowed and no grace. So Methodism was really good for me in that point of view. So initially it was just, you do everything as perfectly as you can, and the congregation was just kind of there. But then as part of my first marriage, I was part of Bethany, which is where I met Nancy. And she would make a point as part of the seminary. I was sang in the seminary choir, went on tour. She made a point of always involving the congregation at some point in one or more of the pieces that we sang. And initially I was like, well, why are you doing this? We're the choir, we should be singing for the people. And it was a journey before I came to really understand how enabling the voice of the congregation is really the most important thing in my job. Mm-hmm. And so now I'm always looking for ways, the people can sing with us here, or here's one of those anthems that's based on a hymn tune and the congregation can join on a refrain or on the final stanza, something like that. And the Hymn Society has just enriched me so much in that way, in that, year after year, I've had the opportunity to see enabling the voice of the people modeled in such wonderful ways and varied ways that I could bring back and say, oh, here's a song that we learned at Hymn Society and it goes like this. And most recently, I've also become connected with Music That Makes Community and paperless music, which is yet another layer of enabling the voice of the congregation.
I just want to interject that as we're talking, Eileen, Ana Hernandez says, preach. So I wonder if there are things that you've learned from one another in your careers, because you sort of seem to complement each other a lot in terms of your ministry and your approach to music and worship.
Well, one of the secrets of our happiness is that we've always had separate domains. I had my church and I was in charge there, and she has El Sobrante Methodist, and she's been the music minister there. Now she's a deacon there. I forget, what is your title?
Minister of Worship and Mission.
Yeah. So, we have our separate domains. We do occasionally do something together, but we've had our worst fights in our marriage around musical interpretation. And I've learned to put her in charge when we're doing something together.
Okay.
That's interesting, because I would have said we've learned that whoever's in charge, that person's in charge.
Yeah.
But I guess it ends up being me more than you.
So both things can be true
Yes,
simultaneously.
Yeah,
yes,
that's right.
yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah, and I think our joke between the two of us is that I'm from the academy and he's from the saloon.
I get it. Yeah.
But just in terms of myself, so you have this very rigid classical musician who's reading the notes and playing the notes on the page. And Dan comes with the complete freedom of someone growing up in a church where they're playing 3-chord gospel and the pianists there are always improvising and transposing. And then, jazz, which is also built around improvisation. And so I think Dan has really helped me to learn how to give myself permission to just not play what's on the page. It's like, it's okay. If you play something that's not there, it's okay.
Indeed it is.
I learned to play the piano from a series of pastors' wives, and they improvised. We didn't actually use that word. We just added notes to what was there. Little bass, pa, something. I learned to call it stride piano or bouncy Baptist, but we were just adding notes. That's the only terminology we had. But I played hymns and started playing in church at a pretty early age. The first time I played, I was probably, 8 years old, and I played an offertory for the evening service. It was some little 8-bar hymn, but it had 3 sharps, and I just never got it right. I played it several times during the service, taking the offering. Never once did I play the thing right. And I went back and sat next to my mother and cried. But in a couple of months, I played something else and only had 1 flat, and I did better on that one. But pretty soon, I was playing hymns for congregational singing. I never ever played Bach until I was a freshman music major in college. Then I played Invention Number 1 and 8, and I played them very poorly. Never played any Mozart at all in my piano lessons, junior high and high school. I played the Mozart Sonata Facile, that's what they call it in C, when I was a freshman in college. But I was a voice major in college because I didn't have any classical training, and I wasn't qualified to major in piano. Luckily, I could sing okay.
Yes.
Well,
Go ahead.
I wanted to ask you a little bit about your writing, because clearly your writing has been influenced by your own musical formation. And I was wondering if you could say a little bit about the ways in which jazz and your improvisational style have influenced the way that you write for congregations.
Yeah, I wrote my first 113 hymns, 24 of which got published in The Faith We Sing, the Hope collection that came out in 1993, without really the benefit of any training in jazz. I was playing in saloons already by that time because I could improvise and read out of a fake book. But I was actually serving the church in Point Richmond 8 years into my ministry when I finally found my first jazz piano teacher. That was Dick Hindman, not Dick Hyman. Dick Hindman, really wonderful. He played with Stan Getz and Toots Thielman and has his own recordings out and stuff. Just isn't super well known. Anyway, I studied once a week with him for 20 years, and I would bring him a new hymn every week, and he'd help me with the harmonization of that. And I'd bring in a new jazz standard, and he would help me see different harmonic possibilities in that. So when I was serving at Richmond first was when I actually got some serious training, but it was all independent lessons once a week.
Yeah. And
my teacher also prevented me for a long time from incorporating jazz into my hymn writing. He says, the music of the church is triadic. It's based on the triad, and this is what we're going to do. And, he loved Bach and Mozart and had studied classical. He did classical and jazz. And so I stayed very traditional until he died. And now that he's gone, I'm using jazz more in my hymn writing. But he says, the church music is based on a triad. Jazz is based on the seventh chord and its extensions, the 9s, 11s, and 13s. So,
wow. Of course, that's really things have really pushed outward, don't you think, in the last few years?
Well, my teacher didn't go to church. I mean, he went to, I think, probably the Baptist church in Tennessee when he was a kid. But, he said the Lord's Prayer out loud every night when he went to sleep. But he was not a church goer. He was a jazz pianist, and a really good one.
Huh, that is really fascinating. And Eileen, have you gotten into jazz yourself?
Not exactly. I mean, one of the things that's helped me in terms of feeling more free as a musician is our band at church needed a bass player. And so Dan said, "Oh, I can teach you to play bass in about an hour." Well, that is somewhat true. You can learn to play bass very badly in about an hour.
We can learn a lot of things badly in an hour.
I mean, especially since I already could read and everything, right? It was just the technique of it. And so as part of learning to play bass, and I did take lessons eventually, not with Dan, but with a real bass player. And so I was learning about improvisation and the different kinds of bass lines. And so as part of that, I was starting to learn more about jazz, and learning more about jazz just from being around Dan and watching his compositional process, right? And so I learned about playing over the changes and some of the things that jazz musicians do. So I think my education has definitely increased. And actually, when I first started dating Dan, and I knew he was into jazz, I started buying all these jazz records, and listening to all these recordings and learning jazz standards. And so I started becoming familiar with the repertoire fairly early on in our relationship, but in terms of actually executing, not so much. And one of the gifts that Dan has given my band, and I guess the church at large, is that he's created these charts, which are very accessible. They sound really jazzy, but they're very, well, I'd say relatively easy to do because he's voiced all the chords out. So you don't have to know what, some weird jazz chord is. You can just play the notes on the page. Yay.
Yeah, that's handy especially for those of us who rely on the notes on the page, right? Yeah. That's cool. I wonder if we talk a little bit about the Hymn Society. I mean, you sort of talked at the beginning, we talked about the place of the Hymn Society and your journey together. I wonder if we talk a little bit about that individually, like you've mentioned a lot of names too, for Brian Wren and Austin Lovelace and Nancy Faust. I wonder if you talk a little bit about your role in the Hymn Society and how it's sort of accompanied you on your own journey in church ministry, and the impact it's having that you observed along the way. So either.
Want me to go first?
Yeah.
Oh, all right. Well, I don't think it's an exaggeration to say the Hymn Society changed my life. I mean, finding a life partner, that's a pretty major thing.
Totally.
But just in terms of how it's shaped me in terms of exposure to repertoire, exposure to new ideas, exposure, especially in terms of global song, a way to use hymns to sing justice, and just in terms of my spiritual life, it really is a time when I can refill my own well. I can come in the summertime and be with people and sing. And it feels very non-political, non-drama. We're just together and we're singing each other's songs. And I feel like there is such power in that. Such power in, regardless of our denominations or our theological understandings, understandings that have deeply divided the church historically, yet somehow miraculously we're able to come together in this body and we sing together and we're one. And it's giving me goosebumps. Sorry.
Well, thank you for the goosebump, honey. I started writing hymns in seminary at Pacific School of Religion in Berkeley, and Wilbur Russell was a professor of church music at SFTS, the Presbyterian school in San Anselmo. What's it?
San Francisco Theological Seminary.
Thank you. And Will said to me, "Oh, you should join the Hymn Society." And so I did. And he said, "Oh, you should send your hymns to Austin Lovelace for comments." And so I did. And you may know Austin never used a computer. He always used a typewriter. But he would send me comments back, within a few days. And later on, I would send him like 30 or 40 hymns at once or something. He would comment on every single one of them.
Wow.
And he always said, "Well, this is not the voice of God. This is just my opinion." But he gave me free counsel. Brian Wren did the same thing for me. He was doing a workshop at Lakeshore Avenue Baptist Church in Oakland when I was a pastor serving two little churches, Sutter and Meridian, up near Yuba City, California. And I drove down just to hear his evening lecture. I didn't attend the whole weekend. But afterwards, I waited till I was last in line and I said, "I'm Dan Damon, I write hymns. Would you have time to look at a couple of these?" And he looked at his watch and it was late at night. He was tired, but he said, "Okay, let's go to this Sunday school room down the hall." And I played a couple of my hymns for him. He commented at the time. And a couple of weeks later, I got this areogram letter from him, which I still have in my file. He said, "Dear Dan, I apologize for being under a cloud of tiredness when we met, but I'd like to affirm your gifts as a hymn writer, encourage you to continue to send me things from time to time for comments." And so, when I went to the first hymn society, I met Brian and started to meet all these other people. It has literally changed my life. Every book of hymns that I've written has comments and contributions from people like Austin Lovelace and Brian Wren and Richard Leach. And now the new book that's coming out, Carl Daw has been commenting on some of those. And Fred Graham has commented on some of my tunes this past year. So we call it a single author collection, but it's really
a village.
Yeah, everybody's helping. We just want the hymns to be as good as possible. The words and music, the poetry, the theology. Gracia Grindle has offered comments and encouragement to me over the years. So, I mean, the Hymn Society has literally changed my life.
And I guess one other thing that I wanted to add is just the number of really dear people and wonderful friendships that we've developed over the years of attending these conferences. And I consider it a privilege to have spent time on the executive committee. It was very interesting to me to kind of see the back end of things, sort of the inner workings and all the details that are involved in planning a summer conference, and the very thoughtful and sometimes intense discussions around where do we want to go in terms of future direction. And is just a marvelous experience. And I learned a lot about donor cultivation and fundraising because I was on the EC when we were doing our big capital push.
Well, I want to get into that a little more of that in a moment, but I did want to just comment on both of you sort of talked about the life of the Hymn Society in such collaborative terms. I mean, that the relationships, I mean, you brought up the friendship part, but they also have been so enriching, people helping one another and commenting on one another's work, and all in a very generous and non-competitive kind of way. It's something that I think characterizes the life of the society. But about the executive committee, Eileen, I wonder if you could say a little more about what it was like to be on the executive committee, and because you served at a time of tremendous transition, and I wonder if you could talk about that a little bit.
I would. It was a lot of work, but it was very rich. And at the time when I was on the EC, we had our annual meetings in person at Richmond Hill, which is a retreat center in Richmond, Virginia.
Mm-hmm.
And I agree with Jeffrey Moore in calling that a thin place in terms of the boundaries between the spiritual and the physical are very blurred there. And it was a very rich time because we were, not only were we working together for the society, but we were worshiping together, we were praying together, working together, having fun together too. I think anytime you're with a group of people working very intensely toward a goal, whatever that goal happens to be, you're bonded in a very special way. And one of the things that I'm most proud of in terms of my time on the EC was I was there when we first crafted our vision statement. And Jeffrey Moore led us through that process. And it was an amazing, amazing thing where we just, it was an iterative process where we kept narrowing it down and narrowing it down until we finally came up with the end result. And to hear the different, excuse me, I'm so sorry, to hear the different voices and the different perspectives of the group to say, well, I think, we really need to emphasize the faith formation part of this, or we need to emphasize our legacy to what has come before, all these various threads, or community, and how we just work together to come up with something that really represented who we wanted to be and do.
One of the things that strikes me about that vision statement is that it talks about what congregational song does. In other words, it's about the impact. It's not really about what it expresses. It's not from this side. It's really from that side. And I wonder. I mean, that obviously was a deliberate choice, right? To frame it that way. Can you say more about what kind of went into that, or how you're seeing the way that statement is playing out, as because it's been a while now and it's been out there and living in the world.
I'll just talk about it. I guess I'll talk about it from my own context. It was really important to me to talk about that as I was going through the ordination process. I'm so sorry. The United Methodist Church the ordination process in the United Methodist Church, I don't think I'm giving any secrets away here, can be very arduous. And especially in our conference, there were some challenges for people pursuing ordination as deacons. And I continually had to explain what a call to music ministry meant. And I used that language from the Hymn Society over and over and over again as I met with committees and did my papers, to talk about the transformative power of congregational singing. Like, this is the work of the church in terms of building up the body, building up the people of Methodism to go out in the world and do justice, because that's really a big part of who we are, I believe, as United Methodists, to what's the word that I want? We're embodying our faith through this practice. and this act of singing together as people is transforming us, building us up, enriching us so that we can then go out and transform the world.
Yeah. Dan, how you have certainly have been a big part of the Hymn Society, but you weren't directly part of this process. I wonder, that statement, how it sits with you and how it has affected you.
Well, I like it a lot, and I used to think I wanted to be on the executive committee, but when Eileen got on it, I realized how much work it was. So I'm not so sure I want to be on it anymore. And I can't remember that entire statement, but I think there's something about promoting peace in there. And Eileen, wasn't that your good idea to put that in?
Yeah.
She mentioned that to me at the time, that we promote peace with our singing. It's a beautiful thing. Even when I'm playing jazz at Lara's Fine Dining on the Richmond waterfront, my music is pretty peaceful. I'm not a virtuoso. I don't play a million notes a minute, and I never liked rock and roll, and I never liked bebop. I just, I like peaceful, beautiful music, and to create a mood for people. And whether I'm playing jazz or writing hymns, I'm really the same person. And in a sense, those are two sides of the same coin. Like the spirituals and the blues. I play the blues on Saturday night and spirituals on Sunday morning. Sometimes they're the same song.
The boundary is quite thin, right? Just to quote the statement, because I think people may be wondering exactly what it says. We believe that the holy act of singing together shapes faith, heals brokenness, transforms lives, and renews peace. Four elements. And I think, Eileen, you sort of hinted at all of the conversation behind each one of those two-word phrases, right?
Yes.
Like shape faith, heal brokenness, transform lives, renew peace. And did you say that the renews peace one was something that you advocated for pretty strongly?
Yeah, I advocated for the word peace being included. I mean, even though I'm now United Methodist, I definitely consider Anabaptism to be part of my spiritual heritage, being part of a Mennonite congregation and then Church of Brethren congregation for many years. And so, yes, it was important to me that peace was a piece of it.
You mentioned Nancy Faust earlier, and I hope Paul Richardson won't mind me quoting a little story I heard him tell once, that he was on the EC at the same time as Nancy. I think she was the president at the time, or maybe not. But anyway, they were going around introducing themselves at the beginning of the meeting, and she said that she represented the peace churches. And Paul said, well, I guess I represent the war churches.
Yeah, I remember that.
So thank you for that, Paul. Anyway, hopefully all Christians advocate for peace at some level, even if they're not Anabaptists, right?
Yeah.
And we do that by our singing. We're getting near the end of our time, and I do want to ask one last question. And if anybody has a question, I'll actually be happy to present it to Dan and Eileen after this, but I wonder if you could talk a little bit about what might be your fondest hope for the Hymn Society going forward.
Well, I love the fact that we're no longer this society of old white guys singing songs that were written before 1900. So I hope that we just continue on in terms of figuring out how we draw, as Deb Loftus talked about it, pulling the tent pegs out further, making our tent bigger, but at the same time, not losing that sense of continuity. I mean, I still want to be singing those 4-part hymns. I still want to be singing, Oh, 4,000 Tongues. But at the same time, I want to be singing songs that are going to give voice to people who don't have a song to sing. Like Dan's been doing work recently with Steph Budway for the intersex community and the transgender community. And so finding voice for those people, finding ways to be more just in terms of the songs we sing, both representationally and also in terms of not appropriating, but singing with understanding and respect. Share your song with me and let me share my song with you.
Beautiful. Thank you.
My last hymn collection, Little Seeds, I used a lot of tunes from around the world, and Michael Hahn just did a review in the hymn that lifts up some of those. And so I love to hear the beautiful folk music from around the world. I think there's some of the most beautiful melodies ever written, whether it's from China or Korea or Sweden, you know, or the USA. And I've been arranging some of the African American spirituals in my collections too, and using the harmonies of jazz, which seem to fit so beautifully with those melodies. In the coming collection, Look at the Light, I do have a hymn inspired by Steph Budway's lecture last year at the conference in DC. She challenged us to write a hymn using the word intersex. So I wrote a couple of those. And then I was with her in Nashville talking to her class, and I said, what other hymns do we need? And she said, well, we could use a hymn with the word transgender in it. So I just recently I wrote one of those, and Scott fitted in. It's to a digital only collection. He says it's easier to fit something in at the last minute. And so my new collection coming out will have a hymn that uses that word also. And as far as we know, it's the first time those words have been used, you know, so, but I do hope that we'll continue to sing songs from around the world, but also not lose our voice as a four-part singing community. And I always look through the program to see if there are any Dan Damon hymns going to be sung that week. And naturally, I can't help hoping there will be.
Of course. I really appreciate the way both of you answered this, because I think it sort of speaks to the Hymn Society, you know, always not only extending the tent outward, but also pushing the envelope and making sure that we're addressing the issues that the church has to continue to deal with, and to be authentic to the gospel, and to you know, being in the world as it is. So I really appreciate that so much. Well, it's been really fun to talk to you both. Steph Budway, by the way, does say, Dan, thank you for taking up the challenge. So thank you for saying that, Steph. And again, thanks to both of you. We do have one more interview left in this series next month. We'll be talking to Dolores Duffner. And by the way, I see that she's on here watching too. So Dolores, we'll be looking forward to talking with you next month. And we've got a series planned for next year, 9 more of these interviews. So it's been too much fun not to continue doing. So thanks both of you. Take care.
Blessings. Thank you so much.